The 7 days of creation. It's the first Bible story, the first story in the Torah, the Pentateuch, that we encounter. It starts with the words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And when we start reading this story, perhaps as when we read it when we're children, or we hear about it as we're growing up, we picture this, we get these real epic cinematic picture going through our heads of the creation of a universe and an earth that came about, and maybe some bright white heaven above it, and between them some firmament that exists between them, and then on the earth the land and the seas started coming about and dividing, and then upon that all kinds of vegetation and plant life and seeds and trees started growing, and then after that all kinds of livestock and animals, and finally a man came about within that whole picture. And we might perceive that corporeally according to the way our five senses absorb information in our world, that we get this picture like this and think of it like that. However, according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, this story, as well as the entire Torah, describe structures and processes that take place in the spiritual world before our physical universe was created to begin with, before the planet Earth was created, before all these things that we might imagine to ourselves when we read these texts, vegetation, plant life, birds, livestock, etc., etc., and man, as we might picture him as either a Homo sapien as we know today, or a Neanderthal man, or a caveman, or however we perceive that man that it describes. The wisdom of Kabbalah actually talks about how the language of these stories is like a code which is describing, as we mentioned, spiritual structures and processes, interplays of giving and receiving, a force of love, bestowal, giving, and connection that created everything, a force that's called God or the Creator, which created a desire to receive the creation or the created being, which wishes to receive all that delight and pleasure that the Creator created, and that there was these processes taking place in creation, in the concatenation down of all kinds of relationships between these two forces. And among them, there is a certain place in that structure and among these processes called the 7 days of creation. And as much as these things took place before the creation of our universe, since they're at the foundations of our universe and of our very being, of each and every person that exists, of each and every animal and plant, and even all the still matter of the universe, rocks, stars, galaxies, because these processes are at the very foundation of everything, they play out at every single moment of our lives, and we can use these processes to help us advance in a spiritual way back to those same levels that they're discussing. So that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to start unraveling this story from the perspective of the wisdom of Kabbalah. And first, we're just going to go into this little opener. This is Kabbalah Explained Simply. I'm Markos, and we're going to get into the 7 days of creation right after this. Okay, so as with all these Bible stories, we've done a few now on Kabbalah Explained Simply. You might have seen one recently on Adam and Eve. We've done them on Noah's Ark, on the war of Gog and Magog, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Ten Commandments, and we'll probably do some more. So one very important takeaway that we always mention in the beginning, which, if anything, this could be the most important thing out of each and every one of these lessons, is what we see here, that the language of the Torah, the language of all these Bible stories as we know them, is called the language of branches, where it describes spiritual structures and processes taking place in the spiritual worlds on their concatenation downward to this world. And they don't describe corporeal things, people, history, or it's not some kind of fantasies or imagination that people made up. But it describes these interplays of the force of giving and bestowal and the force of the creation, the force of the Creator and the creation, as they were stemming down from above downwards. And Kabbalists are the ones who wrote these texts originally. Kabbalist is a term that Kabbalah means reception, and Kabbalist is one who has received the attainment of those forces with a new sense that they develop, a sense of bestowal and love, a sense that is in equality with the same force that's creating that same force that we know, that we read about in the Bible, the force called God, the force called Creator, which is a force of bestowal and love. So a Kabbalist is one who attains the sense of that force and is able to perceive those deeper levels in reality. Sometimes we call them deeper levels, sometimes we call them higher levels. It's as if we get a sense that perceives deeper than all of our five senses perceive, and opens up this new reality, what's called a new world, where we're able to see how the forces act on us at deeper levels and what they're doing in those levels. And we also become able to respond and act with those forces before they stem down into our corporeality that materializes at every moment before our eyes. So that's a little bit about the language of branches, just to show how this comes about in the wisdom of Kabbalah. There's an article that discusses the language of branches in more detail. It's called The Essence of the Wisdom of Kabbalah by Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag, Bala Sulam, who's the most renowned Kabbalist of the last century and of our time in general. And he describes the wisdom of Kabbalah as no more and no less, as we're reading here, than a sequence of roots that hang down by way of cause and consequence, following fixed, determined laws that interweave into a single exalted goal described as the revelation of his godliness to his creatures in this world. Right? So when we're reading these texts, this is an overarching formula we can take to these texts, that we're reading about, as it says here, a sequence of roots that hang down by way of cause and consequence, following fixed determined laws that interweave into a single exalted goal described as the revelation of his godliness to his creatures in this world. So we're reading about these roots in creation, as it says, the causes of what happened before the creation of our corporeal world as we know it, everything that we perceive with our five senses of sight, smell, touch, hearing, and taste. So we're learning about this causal level and this stemming down of cause and consequence within all these forces, as we said, interplays of giving and receiving at these higher levels of creation. And they follow, as it says, fixed, determined laws that interweave to a single exalted goal. So the whole process that's described in the wisdom of Kabbalah is one of the Creator creating a creation which undergoes all kinds of processes, all kinds of relationships between the reception of the creation that was created and the bestowal of the Creator. And through these processes it goes eventually to a state where it reaches a state where everything is created for a certain person in this world. You could say us people, or the person in our world, as it says, the revelation of his godliness to his creatures in this world. So the whole purpose of everything is that from the state called this world is the final corporeal world that we do perceive with our five senses, as was mentioned. So while we are in this current perception and sensation of reality that we are in now, this corporeal perception, non-spiritual perception, our goal is that we reveal all those roots and all those causes that stemmed down from the very first root that exists in reality, or in the spiritual worlds, as you say, and to reveal them, to reach a revelation, as it says, of his godliness. You could say a revelation of the Creator, a revelation of the upper force of love, bestowal, and connection to us people, to his creatures, while we're alive in this world. So that's something that we can take with us as this guide when we approach these texts, to see what kind of roots, what kinds of causes are we talking about in creation. Ultimately, we're looking into what deeper levels of ourselves are we learning about when we get into examining and looking into these stories. Because we're talking about, if we picture reality as this, let's say an onion, that our lives are like this onion. So our corporeal lives from our birth till today, it's like we're living on a certain surface level of that onion. We're just perceiving what's on the surface. And the more we embark on a spiritual quest and start discovering these higher forces that exist beyond our world, it's like we start peeling away the layers of that onion. And what we're going to get into today this story about the 7 days of creation, it's the very root that even before the creation of the soul that we all connect back into, a single soul, which is the soul of each and every person in this world who's ever lived, who's currently living, and who will live, that everyone is sourced in a single soul that was created after these 7 days of creation, which we learn about in the story of Adam and Eve. There's a link in the description to the other episode of Adam and Eve if you want a continuation of this. By the way, this came about as a request from that other lecture where there was a request to do a part 2. So this is like a part 2, but a part 2 going backwards. So through all what we can attain, we peel away these layers within ourselves, we get deeper in reality, we get higher into reality, and we can reveal these layers where we are all sourced as one soul, one desire to receive that was created by the Creator, which is in what's called in equivalence of form with the Creator, which has the same intention and the same direction upon that desire that the Creator has toward the creation, meaning one of complete love, bestowal, just as the Creator has toward the creation. That is somewhat a picture of this original soul that we were created in. And even before the creation of that soul, there was an environment that was created for that soul to be able to even come about and exist. And these 7 days of creation that we're going to get into describe the creation of that environment. So again, we're talking about the creation of certain conditions of an environment. You could call it a habitat, a spiritual one, not one that has any physical dimensions, but a spiritual environment that was created where after the creation of that environment, the conditions were set for the soul of what's called the soul of Adam Harishon, the soul of the first man, as it's said, the interconnected soul where we are all there as one, you could say one body, one mass, where we the root of each and every person's being exists in that soul. And that's the soul that we can attain when we make steps, when we're learning this wisdom and we're moving back from this world to the spiritual world, as we said as we saw in that original definition, that the whole purpose of this study, even though we're studying processes that hang down from above downwards, the purpose of this study is that we reveal that there is a goal for all of this, all of these structures and processes that are hanging down towards us, and that goal is to reveal all of that from this world, which is the lowest point that was created in reality, back upwards to the spiritual or higher world. And so through the study of these texts, if we just go back, we can actually attract upon ourselves the influence of those higher degrees that were created, all those deeper layers of reality, and invite them to ourselves. However, that's also on condition that we study them with such an intention, which we'll get into for today. But today we'll just get some tastes of what's going on in these stories. Just another disclaimer about that these stories, even though they discuss these deeper levels of reality, we can see here some diagram that shows the spiritual world, which is above this world. If we say this world is underneath this barrier here, so the spiritual world is beyond the barrier. The barrier, we can think of it as the barrier between our current 5 senses and the creation of a new sense. So when we create this new sense, one that is equal in form to the Creator's form of love, bestowal, and connection, so we start perceiving these deeper levels of reality here. Even though the first story of the 7 days of creation, it starts with in the beginning, it's not actually the beginning. It's the beginning in relation to us. As we said, it's the environment in which the soul of Adam Harishon later could dress and live within, which is created around here in this picture of these upper worlds. Before that, there was other preliminary, you could say, preparations for that to come about. And in the wisdom of Kabbalah, we learn about these 7 days of creation as being 7 sfirot of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, which are the 6 that were created, and then Malchut being the 7th. So that's just a little bit of a taste. Now we're going to get into it. Let's read a bit from the story, and and start discussing it from there. So as we said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. Okay, these are the very first words of the Bible, the very first words of the Torah, the beginning of Genesis. What are some takeaways we can take from this? Firstly, Genesis, when this part that we're reading, the part called Genesis, the chapter, in Hebrew it's called Beresheet, and that comes from two words, bara and sheet. Bara means created, or he created, and sheet in Aramaic is six. So Bereshit means it created six. So if we're talking about, as we saw earlier, it's the creation of these, what we later come to know as the 6 days, or the 6 Sfirot of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, this place in which would later become an environment to for the soul to come about and for the soul to exist. And that's why we learn that this, in the beginning, it's the beginning in relation to us, in relation to our soul, in relation to the work that we can do to reach that final state in creation, which to us is, the final state, which is also the first state of creation in relation to us, this point here, the environment with which the soul exists. Another thing here is to differentiate. These words come about, heaven and earth, or Shamayim and Aretz in Hebrew. In short, we can define those as heaven being the desire to bestow in the creation, and earth being the desire to receive in the creation. And it also says there that the earth was formless and void. You see here. So just to get a bit deeper into earth, the word for earth in the Torah, it's eretz. In Hebrew, it's eretz. It means desire. It stems from the same linguistic root as the word for desire, which is ratzon. So when we're talking about earth, whenever you see the word earth in the Torah, it's talking about a desire that was created. Desire is the matter of creation. It's all that was created. If we look here, so what does it mean that the earth was unformed and void? So we talk about a desire being matter. Even right now, if you look at each and every single one of your desires, you can see that desires precede every one of your thoughts, precede every one of your actions, one of your behaviors, your movements. All of our thoughts, actions, behaviors, motions, they all have this driving primal factor behind them, which is desire. So even in our corporeal world, we can see how desire is this matter, this something which is behind and before everything that comes after them, which, as we said, are thoughts which are motivated by desires. Our thoughts, our mind is like a computer or a calculation device, which is always working to fulfill the desire which is emerging within us at a deeper level. So desire, Kabbalists have defined it as matter, as the matter of creation, as the primal matter, which in these higher degrees we can define desire in its pure form. And so when we're saying that the earth or the desire was unformed, it means that the form that we place upon the desire is the intention. Intention meaning with what purpose do we use the desire, in what direction. So in the very first creation of the heaven and the earth was unformed, the earth was void, meaning that it has no form, no direction by which it willingly by itself is aiming itself at spirit, in the spiritual direction, in a direction of bestowal, love, and back to the Creator. No independence, simply this matter that was created. But it still signifies that there is this force of bestowal creating a desire to receive, and that these two coexist in some way. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's continuing there. So here we get the introduction of light, light meaning the force or quality of bestowal and love. Again, that's what we're talking about when we hear and see this word light in the Torah. That light is the quality of the Creator, the quality that stems down from the Creator toward the creation, which we feel and which we receive as this bestowal, as this complete love for us. Why is it bestowal and love? Because the desire of the Creator, the purpose that the Creator has toward the created beings, is to create a creation in order to fill it with complete delight and pleasure. In order that's that love that's coming from that place above, from the Creator. So the light is the quality, the attitude itself, stemming from the Creator toward the creation. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. We see this terminology that God saw that it was good, or the light was good. Later we'll see it in the following passages. When we're seeing this passage, it simply means that when God's seeing that something is good, it means that it's under the governance, under the providence of the force of bestowal and love, that anything which is dressed and which is operated completely by that force of bestowal and love, by that force called God, as we said, and the light. So it's what's considered good, meaning that it's in that original quality which is equal in form with the Creator. And God separated the light from the darkness. So here we're also seeing this initial separation of light and darkness, in short, of bestowal and reception. Also here we can see another word taking place here, that this separation taking place, this separation between light and darkness, it's also included in that very first word, in the beginning, the very first words in this portion in Genesis, or in Beresheet. Those words in Hebrew are actually Beresheet, and Beresheet, the very first part of Beresheet, is bar. Bar means outside in Aramaic, so creating something, meaning that the Creator created something outside itself, that this desire to receive doesn't exist in the Creator. The Creator only has this will to bestow and love, and this concept of receiving just is non-existent in the Creator. So the Creator created this quality, this desire to receive, which is outside of himself, in order to receive all that delight and pleasure that it wishes to impart. And we start getting these concepts of day and night. So we can stem these concepts of day and night down to ourselves as concepts that relate to a spiritual ascent and a spiritual descent. Day is an ascent, meaning that it's a state where we are illuminated by that light, where the light fills us, where the light enters us, and where we feel under the control of the light, under the guidance of the light, similar to a baby in its mother's arms, something like that. And descent means a disconnection from that light, a distancing from that light, this separation, this darkness, as it said. So, and we relate to those even when we're doing our spiritual work from our world back to the spiritual world, and we undergo these states that we're learning about now. So we're always talking about going through processes of ascents and descents. And in general, the advice and what the wisdom of Kabbalah helps us to do is to, and really you could say the main goal of all spiritual work that we do in our world heading back up to discover these states that we're reading about, is to shorten the night. To shorten the night as much as possible. Night's a time when we go to sleep. When we go to sleep, it's considered that our heads and our bodies are at the same level, meaning that everything that we calculate, the thoughts and what we can exert to apply as intentions to bestow back to the Creator upon our desire, which usually means that the intention is placed upon the desire if we're moving towards spirituality. So at night, those are at the same level. It's like our desires and thoughts, it's all at the same level. It's this unconscious kind of time. And nights if we're not speaking about corporeality, where nights, it's pretty much defined with this time of day and this time of night, no matter where we are in the world, it's different hours for that, etc. But in relation to spirituality, a night can be, it could go for 1 millisecond, it could go for one whole day, it could go for a month, it could go for years, it could go for an entire lifetime, meaning we can be in a state of descent, a state of detachment from the light for a long time. And the whole purpose of studying Kabbalah and doing this spiritual work that we learn about is to literally to awaken that day upon ourselves. There's a saying in the wisdom of Kabbalah called, I awaken the dawn, and I don't let the dawn awaken me. Meaning we take an active approach during that night by setting ourselves up in a certain environment which influences us with that light, you could say even in an artificial way, we influence ourselves with the light through certain means that we place around ourselves. Those means we study more in the wisdom of Kabbalah itself. But we, through all kinds of placing means around ourselves and environment around ourselves, we can awaken that daytime to come much sooner, meaning awaken a spiritual ascent to come and literally pull ourselves out through attracting the forces. And one of those means is by studying the books of Kabbalah with a Kabbalistic guide and also with a Kabbalistic group. And we go along those processes. So just a quick summary of day one in this 7-day process. It's the awareness of the existence of light, the force of bestowal and love, what's called day, and its opposite darkness, the force of reception, night, and the necessity to coexist. That's what's taking place in this first day as a short summary. Let's move it along. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day." Okay, what can we take from this? One is this first appearance of waters or water. Water is called the light of mercy or the light of chasadim, as we learn about it in the Kabbalistic language, where the land, the desire, now has this other discernment of bestowal, which is, you could say, close to it, which is setting up the conditions for these waters to come into contact with the land. They're still separated in this second day, but it's setting up the conditions for them to eventually enter into an interaction, into a relationship. What does it mean that waters and land come into a relationship? It means it creates the conditions for a certain kind of growth. We know that growth in our world is as plant life, vegetation, etc. So, in short, in day two, we get the development of an ability in the creation to differentiate between desires that are closer to the Creator, which is called heaven, and desires that are further away from the Creator. So that original separation that was created in day one, now the creation has this ability to differentiate between them, and that's also expressed as the waters coming about and setting up conditions where we'll see where those conditions lead now in day three. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit according to their kind with seed in them." And it was so. The earth produced vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day. Okay, so as we talked about, we have the water, which now we start getting this structure coming about. We have the water representing bestowal, the earth representing reception, which in spirituality we define these, or in the language of Kabbalah you'll hear about these as the right line and the left line. The right line being the representing the side of bestowal, the left line representing the side of reception. And what comes about as a result of as a result of a balanced combination of these lines. It's important mentioning balanced, because even though it might appear that bestowal is, an exalted quality that we want only to bestow, however, even in our world, you can see the outcomes if you have too much water. Yeah, if you drink too much water, you can drown. Even that story of Noah and the flood, of this excessive water, it's when too much water comes that we're not ready for. So it's a state that brings about destruction, and it's an imbalanced state. So in spirituality, we always talk about balance and how we bring about this middle line from the correct balance between bestowal and reception, the qualities of the Creator and the qualities of the creation. So that middle line here represents this growth, or spiritual growth, you can say, which starts from a small amount of growth, the plants that yield seeds, to a bigger growth, which are fruit-bearing trees. So it's talking about conditions being set up in our desire, between some desire for bestowal that created the desire to receive, and when they enter a certain correct kind of balance, that brings about the conditions for growth. And here it's talking about spiritual growth, the growth of a new ability for a bigger desire to receive to come along, which can continue being in equivalence of form with the Creator. Yeah, so just a summary of day 3. It's the development of an ability for spiritual growth. As we said here, plants yielding seed, trees bearing fruits, through acquiring balance, the middle line between bestowal, the water, and reception, the earth. Moving on. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens, to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a 4th day. So, just one thing that we can say in general about day 4, even before we get to this summary here. So all this addition of days, years, and extra spaces, it's talking about in general we can see that there's this desire that the Creator created, and the desire is going from being very small, from having no form. As I said, the earth was unformed and void, from being very small, and it develops and gets bigger and bigger. So in the previous day, we saw how that desire reached a point where it created this balance between bestowal and reception, and it was able to further grow. And now, as a result of even more growth, we see even more things coming about. As it says, days, years, months, etc., etc. All these concepts of years, months, by the way, it's also not talking about time as we understand time in our corporeal lives, because in our corporeal lives, there's a fixed amount of time, and we just exist within that time that we've defined for ourselves. Rather, as we talked about how the whole purpose of spiritual work is to shorten the nights, shorten the state of detachment from spirituality in order to illuminate that day state upon ourselves, and we can go through, if we're really active in our spiritual progress, we can go through several days and nights, even in a single corporeal day. So likewise, the word for month in spirituality, in you could say in the spiritual language, in the language of branches, or in Hebrew, the word for month is chodesh, which stems from the linguistic root for chidush, which means renewal. So 1 month is this renewal that we undergo. A year, shana in Hebrew, stems from the word, the linguistic root from the word lishot, which also means repeat, like repeating a cycle, like a full spiral or a full cycle of a whole bunch of states that we go through, which repeat on themselves. And that's how we move forward. There's actually, what's interesting is that there's no astronomical concept of a week in our world. Rather, week is, as we learn here, it's something that's specifically related to this spiritual process that we're now learning about, this creation of an environment that comes about and forms at the end of it the soul of man, the soul of Adam Harishon. So if we just cut to day 4 and what it represents the creation of reality's control room, that place in the quote where it says, "the lights in the firmament of the heavens," which govern the states of the developing creation, forming the place where the soul can reside. We'll move into day 5. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heavens. And God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. Okay, so yeah, even if we just look at the summary of day 5, it's a development of the animate degree. That's what it's talking about, allowing more freedom of movement and development in our spiritual progress, to let the light enter much bigger desires. So what does this mean? As we see here in the example, if we previously talked about just this separation, between heaven and earth, light and darkness, land and sea, land and water, moving on to a combination of the land and the water, which brings about growth, that represents the first stage is just setting up the form itself, preservation of the base foundations that we need to be in place, the desire to bestow, the desire to receive, which is representative of the still level of development. Yeah, the still level of development is the desire to preserve the form of our very being, of a certain environment, for it to be in place for us. That's the still level of development. We can see the still level of development, even physically. We can relate it to how atoms, molecules, every still bit of matter that we define with our physical senses, it just has this desire just to preserve its form, just to be there and to stay there and to stay connected to the other parts which it connects to, and that's it. In our own corporeal desires as well, we can define the still level as those which are there to preserve the form or to preserve the human species. Desires for food, sex, family, shelter, those are considered the still level of desires that even every single individual on this planet, even if they're detached from society, they would still have these desires, because it's the very base, as we said, the very base matter that allows us to continue our form, to continue our species, to continue our existence. So it's something that's been set up by the Creator in such a way to preserve its form, and we learned about that in the first couple of days. And then we learnt about how when the bestowal integrates with reception, and when they interplay and reach a certain balance between them, then a new entity comes about, growth, vegetation, as it says here, plant life. And again, we're not talking about plant life yet on our planet as we understand plants. As we say here, there's a language of branches in place. So there's certain qualities that we perceive in certain objects and things in our world that relate to the desire and the purpose of the level of desire that we're talking about. So the purpose of the level of desire of the next one that came about, the vegetative level, is growth. And here we're relating it to the spiritual growth. In short, the desire is able to expand and grow. The desire to receive is able to expand and grow. And to keep up being under the control of the force of bestowal through its expansion and growth. That's considered spiritual growth. And so when we're talking about day 5 and what happened there, with all the, let's just go back and have a quick read. Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, birds fly above the earth, the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves. There's an emphasis here on movement. The winged bird according to its kind, multiplication, let them be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seeds, and let birds multiply on the earth. So what we see here is an expansion of the desire. The purpose of the animate level of desire, the next level of desire that appears in creation, is one of more freedom of movement. Even if we imagine what's being discussed here physically, we see that all the extra space that's represented here, this extra space of a desire to receive, that it shows the extra growth of the desire that's taking place here, a growth of a desire which is still, as it says, which is still that God saw that it was good, which is still under the control of the force of bestowal in its expansion. So that's what's being created here. And in the Zohar, by the way, there's it's discussed as this. What this is discussing is called heichalot, or palaces or halls. If you can imagine, even just for now, like what it is, a palace that's filled with light. and how such a big expansive space is filled with the quality of the Creator. So that somewhat gives some kind of impression of this bigger, more expanded desire, the animate level of desire in creation that comes about. And if we're talking at our level, we are animals. They have more freedom of movement than the previous level of desire, as we see it expanding into our world, such a level of desire. If we're talking about humans, the physical universe as we see it unfolding, so we talked about still level and how atoms and molecules, how these base elements that we define physically have their desire just to hold form. The vegetative level, as we see with plants, it just has this desire to grow. A plant would just grow towards the sunlight, but stays in the same place, even though it can grow. We have vegetative level on ourselves, a hair that grows in us, and our nails. That's the vegetative level upon a physical person as we know them. The animate level in the universe being just like animals have more freedom of movement, so the animate level in our desires. If we're talking about the still level of desire in the person being one for just preserving the form of the species and food, sex, family, and shelter. So the vegetative level of desire is that of money, is that of already a social level of desire, feeling that the other has something that I want, and entering into all kinds of relationships of exchange and developing as a society. So more freedom of movement is that more social desires come about, desires for honor, desires for control, all kinds of systems that come about through all kinds of bigger levels of desire that emerge in our society. And that, if we keep going, sets the conditions for what comes in day 6. Then God said, "Let the earth produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock and crawling things and animals of the earth according to their kind." And it was so. God made the animals of the earth according to their kind, and the livestock according to their kind, and everything that crawls on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Then God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant-yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit-yielding seed. It shall be food for you. And to every animal of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. Okay, so the main thing that comes up in the 6th day is the creation of man. Man, in this case, it's called Adam in Hebrew, and it also comes from the word for similar or similarity to the Creator. In Hebrew, the word is domeh, meaning Adam and domeh share the same linguistic root. Because of that reason, that man in Hebrew means an entity that was created. As we said, it's not talking about the creation of a physical man, like you and me, but it's talking about the creation of this spiritual entity, a certain level of desire, which can use all the previous levels of desires. Which says that we were created, all these, everything was created for you, all the plants, all the animals, it was all created for you. It says, just like we read in that original definition of the wisdom of Kabbalah, that everything that stems down from above downwards to our world, it's all created for us to use in order to reveal the Creator. It's all for man to use. If we look into Kabbalistic texts which speak in the language of Kabbalah, one of the main ones is called Pticha, the preface to the wisdom of Kabbalah, by Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag, Bala Sulam. You can get that on our site, Kabbalah.info. By the way, we also have courses that teach Pticha in great detail. That's at KabU, which you can also follow the links to these courses. There's a link, by the way, to an introductory course called The Blueprint of Creation, which explains such processes that we discuss here, and even processes prior to this first story of the Torah that the wisdom of Kabbalah discusses. That's why it's called The Blueprint of Creation. It's a course given by Gianni. There's a link just down below this video for you to go straight to that one. And as we said, there's a Pticha course in KabU, which is at a more advanced level. If you go through some stages, you'll be able to join a Pticha course, which is an ongoing course of studying all these processes of the spiritual worlds, the structures of the Sfirot, the parts of him, the worlds that concatenate down to a soul of Adam HaRishon and how that soul shatters, etc. So that's all described in great detail by Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag, by Bala Sulam, in texts such as Preface to the Wisdom of Kabbalah, and even onwards to such texts as Talmud Es Sfirot, the study of the 10 Sfirot, which is also what we study at KabU in more detail, and what we study in the daily Kabbalah lessons with Kabbalist Dr. Michael Laitman. So it's just a bit of a side note, just so you have some options to continue your study if you're feeling some kind of connection to this and want to continue it. So, as we said, the very opening of the Preface to the Wisdom of Kabbalah, what Bala Sulam and Kabbalists of our era feel it being of utmost importance to emphasize, is that everything, what's discussed in this sixth day, is that everything in the universe, all the previous levels of desire, everything on the still, vegetative, and animate levels of desire, was created for the human level, was created for use by a certain entity called man, to use it to use in a way that helps that entity called man come into similarity with the Creator. As it says, man comes from the word for similar, Adam comes from the word for domeh. So everything was created for man, for this desire to reach resemblance with the Creator, or as we learnt in that original definition of Kabbalah, for the revelation of his godliness to his creatures in this world. And so that's what's being discussed here. The sixth day is it's like an accumulation of all the previous days. In the language of Kabbalah, it's called the Sphira of Yesod. Yesod, it's similar to how all kinds of qualities are set up and develop, and the desire expands in the previous Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, and Hod. And in the Sphira of Yesod, it's kind of like taking all those qualities and mixing it together. Kind of like how you take, a tomato from here, a cucumber from there, lettuce from here, cabbage from there, and then slice it all together, and then you have a salad in Yesod. That's some kind of a picture of what it means that all that integrates into this creation of man, and that it's all created for a man to use in order to come into likeness or similarity with the Creator, which is the purpose for creating the man, the purpose why the God or the Creator originally created man. This idea as well, it gets to the very core of perception of reality in spiritual progress, or you could say according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, that the person, even you now yourself, it's considered that you are the center of the entire universe, that you include all these levels of desire, everything we're reading now, all the still level of desire, all the vegetative level of desire, all the animate of desire, it's all included with you in order to use that to come to do some kind of steps in order to come into similarity with the Creator, that there's a purpose with this, in order to acquire that certain form of an intention to bestow upon that all this desire that's divided into these levels of still, vegetative, and animate within us. And then you could say the human level is to work on that form of sharpening the direction, of calibrating everything that's in this sack of all these desires that we have, to direct it to a state where it's equal to the Creator. What does it mean, equal to the Creator? Which means that we use all the desire to receive in a manner of bestowal, love, and connection. And the whole of the wisdom of Kabbalah is like a guide or a method of how to implement that change. So, quick summary of day 6. It's the development of man, who can enter into similarity with the Creator upon all the previous levels of desires that were created. the still vegetative inanimate, and who uses all that was created in order to come into similarity with the Creator. Moving on. And so the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their heavenly lights. By the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. So there's this idea of seven in spirituality, even before we get to the idea of seven in spirituality. So in short, if we're talking about how the first six Sefirot came down to the Sefirah of Yesod, and how this is the place where everything was created for man to use in order to come into similarity with the Creator, those represent, as we also know, 6 days of work. It represents certain corrections being made in order for the desire to be able to expand, the desire that the Creator created, the desire to receive, to be able to expand under the control of the Creator, being able to expand while being encased within the bestowal of the Creator, and being in full awareness of the Creator throughout its expansion. And then the seventh day, it's the correction which comes about without any work, as we learn about the Sabbath. The seventh day as being the day of rest, that it's a blessed and sanctified day, meaning that the seventh day, it's an outcome of all the previous 6 days of work, that everything that was prepared in the previous 6 days comes into the seventh day as if just as a result of that work. It all just assimilates into man on that seventh day. And what we were going to say before was that we'll see this number 7 play out in many aspects of our reality. It says here, the system governing our world consists of 7 parts. Our world's thus divided by 7 and 70. So this is why we talk about 70 nations of the world in the Torah, 7 days of a week, as we know now, 7 colors of the spectrum, 7 notes of the musical scale. We also discuss 70 parts of man's soul. If you get more into the study of the language of Kabbalah and the wisdom of Kabbalah, you'll see that coming about more and more. Also 70-year cycle of a man's life. It's also something discussed in Kabbalistic texts. And the 7th millennium, or 7,000 years, which is the end of correction of man's soul. That's where we'll also discuss this, because if we're talking about the 7 days of creation, it's also equal to 7,000 years or 7 millennia of development. So just a little bit about that. And so now, if we talked about these 7 days, I'll just go back a bit here, which describe a certain stemming down of structures and processes in the spiritual worlds. So we have to understand that this place where the 7 days first came about, it's not even though it's a static place that exists and which formed an environment for the creation of the soul of Adam HaRishon and further processes to take place, such as the shattering of Adam HaRishon, which led into our creation in this world, etc. And in this world we correct that shattering and reach this state of Adam HaRishon, which is in that environment of these 7 days that were created, these Sefirot here. So even though we discuss it as this, you could say, certain place here, it's not just a single place that existed once and doesn't exist anymore and doesn't have anything to do with our lives today. I'm just flipping through this presentation while discussing. But rather, it's talking about these 7 days. It's called 7 millennia or 7,000 years that take place, and we are in an unfolding of those years even in our corporeality. If we're talking about that this language is a language of branches which plays out in our world as we know it, means that it also plays out in human development as we know it. It plays out on the development of the whole universe, of the still, vegetative, animate, and human, even though it first was constructed at these spiritual levels that we're talking about. So there's a certain branching of that into our world, which also plays out, and that's something we discuss in order to see its relevance to our lives today, even to the lives of to everyone in humanity. We see that there's a certain relevance here because everyone's within this structure that we're discussing. Everyone's within this structure of what's called the 7 days, or the 7,000 years, or the 7 millennia. And how does that structure play out in our world? So if we talk about these sfirot that are determined, Chagat, Nehi, and Chabad, I'm just going to show you a diagram. I don't want you to get too scared by this diagram. This is a diagram from the book Introduction to the Book of Zohar by Kabbalist Dr. Michael Laitman. You can also find a link to that in the description. I just want to point out some things within this diagram, even though it appears very detailed. So as we can see here, so what it shows here, just to focus on, you see here it shows a structure of a partzuf, which is divided into Chabad, Chagat, Nehi. That's Chokhmah, Bina, Da'at, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And then after that comes Malchut. Here we see it stemming down into Malchut. These are the 10 Sfirot here. And it shows certain partitions between them. In general, without getting into all these details here, just take this diagram and understand how it's describing this, you could say, a vertical structure, this stemming down of higher Sfirot, such as Keter and Chokhmah and Bina, and leading down to the lower Sfirot of, as we talked about before, this expanding desire, which is still under the control of these higher forces that act upon it. So when we get into the horizontal development, when we talk about development in this world, so we can see these structures play out as these 6,000 years in our world, which leads to a 7,000th year. And this is what it's talking about here. As we said, this is in a book, Introduction to the Book of Zohar. It goes into more detail there, so you can read up on this if you wish there. But just in general, so how does this original Chabad get expressed in our world? From this original year where Adam emerged in our world, there's also this concept of a person who emerged in our world a long time ago. He's also called the Adam HaRishon in the wisdom of Kabbalah. Not connected to the soul of Adam HaRishon that we learn about as a concept of the soul that includes all of us as this interconnected whole. But also there was a person that emerged in this world, as it says here, 5,764 years ago. It's a little bit more now, from the time when this book was written. But in short, a person who emerged, who had what's called a point in the heart. A point in the heart is short for a desire for spirituality. A person who questioned beyond mere corporeal necessities and desires in our world, who questioned the meaning of life, the purpose of life, who at that time was able to make moves forward to discover that sense with which we can perceive this higher level of reality. There's also a book written by that person from around that time called The Angel Raziel, which describes some of the structures and processes of the spiritual world. And that was at this time, and that's called the period of how Chabad, these first 2,000 years, you could say, this very still level of development played out in our world. And then Abraham's time and onwards, it's the beginning of that next 2,000 years, called Chagat, until the destruction of the Second Temple. Just in general, there's lots of things we can talk about from these points in history, and you'll see in lots of Kabbalah Explained Simply and other content we put out, you can take what's happening in humanity and how humanity is unfolding, and see how the wisdom of Kabbalah, describing the causes behind all this unfolding of this matter in our world, how it can describe so many causes and solutions to all kinds of events, problems, issues taking place in our world. But here in general, Abraham's coming about, why does that mark the beginning of the next 2,000 years, this period called Chagat, the concatenation down of these Sfirot of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet? What does that connect to here? So in Abraham's time, as opposed to the time of Adam, and we already start seeing this more, you could say, vegetative level of development. What does it mean, vegetative, in terms of our world? A more social level of development. Abraham emerged at that time after the Tower of Babel, where it represents a certain social crisis, and it was the first Kabbalist to gather groups of people to study as groups and to work on achieving this state of love thy neighbor as thyself in groups of people, or love shall cover all crimes, love shall cover all transgressions, to work, in short, with society to discover these lofty concepts. So that's a period of Chagat, marked by a development of desire, where already group work came about here, through Moses and the Torah, which also came about. The destruction of the Second Temple marks the beginning of the next period, the period of Nahi. And also there's periods within periods. So you have the Chabad Chagat de Nahi, or you could say the Chabad Chagat of Nahi, the still and the vegetative within the speaking level, coming about throughout this whole period from around 2,000 years ago all the way through to what it says here, Bala Sulam in the 20th century. Bala Sulam pointed to the year 1995. Also, the Book of Zohar pointed to the year 1995, where what's called the Nahi of Nahi, the Netzachod Yesod of Netzachod Yesod, the last part of the 6,000 years would come about, which is marked by that spiritual desire, the desire for spirituality, the point in the heart, emerging in humanity at large, that more and more and more people would start feeling this attraction to something beyond what all the corporeal desires in our world give us. In short, we feel all kinds of pleasures from our corporeal desires for food, sex, family, money, honor, control, knowledge, but we feel that there's something outside of those desires that of something of more meaning that we're just not accessing, that our corporeal desires and the pleasures we get in this world aren't fulfilling enough for us. That's summarized as the question, what is the meaning of life? Which is also summarized as the point in the heart, the desire for spirituality. Bala Sulam talks about that also in his introduction to the study of the 10 Sfirot at the beginning there. So this period now, it's considered the last, we could say within the last 200 years or so of that 6,000 year process. And the end of the 6,000 years comes to what's granted as the next day, the 7,000 year, the 7th millennia, which is just given to us, meaning that, this is why sometimes we hear of the 6 days of creation as opposed to the 7 days of creation, because it's called the 6 days of work, or 6,000 years in which we have to act. And even now that we've reached this final point, the Nahi of Nahi, where the desire for spirituality is emerging in humanity en masse, so we have the ability to shorten the period of time. As we said before, that we have the ability to shorten that time of descent, shorten the amount of time that we are detached from spirituality and enter into what's called day, to awaken that day upon ourselves. So that's a place where we're in now, this point here, where it's all pressing towards that 6,000 years, which as we said, we can either go through these processes unconsciously and have as we know time play out until we reach that final state here, and which will lead us to the 7th millennium, or we can activate the study and the attraction of these forces from the higher levels. In short, activate the force of bestowal and love and connection to act on us in a more active way, where we progress with more awareness, understanding, and attainment, and go through these days of work that we are within, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. We are within this structure, and go through it with more awareness and understanding, and ultimately with more pleasure, which is the ultimate purpose of creation, that the Creator created this desire to receive, this creation, all these desires behind us. Every single desire that pops up in us is ultimately a desire for pleasure. But if we change that intention upon the pleasure in order to direct it at wishing to please in a manner of bestowal and love and connection outwardly to others, back to similarity with that force that created us, then we achieve that full revelation of the Creator, which is called the purpose of creation. We invite that force called the 7th millennium to ourselves, and it brings us to the full revelation of that one soul of Adam HaRishon that we were sourced in, our total interconnection, interdependence as a single entity. And that's all we have time for today. As I mentioned before, we're going to go, after this, we're going to go and have a Q&A session for an hour plus in Kabu, So feel free to join in there. We'll be there on Zoom, so you can ask all kinds of questions about this if you have them, or really about anything that you want Kabbalah's answers to. As I mentioned earlier, KabU is the place where you can really get deeper into all these concepts and even exercise them in a very practical manner. I do recommend that if you feel some affinity to these concepts about the language of branches and the study of the wisdom of Kabbalah, then take the course that's linked in the description, the Blueprint of Creation. That's a good one to start with on those. And then there's options to study, much more advanced materials in KabU as well, where we get into the study of Kabbalah much more deeply, where you can find as well an environment of like-minded seekers to support this spiritual progress that we discuss here. And that's about it.